Okay, 15 minutes. Guardianship is a mess. Guardianship is a disaster. Even professional guardians will reluctantly admit that they would never want their parents in guardianship. No one wants to be a ward of the state. No one wants to be totally helpless and dependent on the kindness of others. Moreover, the system that exists today is punitive instead of helpful. It is deceptive instead of transparent. And it is, by law, transgressing its own statutes. The statutes in Statute 744, which I've been through so many times in the last 5 years, were really well designed. They were well meant. They were intended to say, you know, we have a problem in this country. There are people who need help. And some of them are pretty wealthy. Like, for example, do you know who Mickey Rooney was? Do you know who the owner of the Los Angeles Clippers was? Do you know who Glenn Campbell is? Do you know who Michael Jackson was? And I have a list on our website, and I invite you to go to our website, www.aapg.net, where I have one white paper that lists dozens and dozens of famous people who have been embroiled in multi-million-dollar guardianship cases. Casey Kasem, everybody remember Casey Kasem, America's Top 40? Well, his daughter, who we talk to every now and then, is furious about what happened to her father. This is a widespread phenomenon. It is an unfortunate situation that there is so much money involved. And remember, we're now talking about the boomer generation. We've gone from the greatest generation, the World War II veterans and survivors, to the boomer generation, and we are in the single greatest transfer of intergenerational wealth in history. There's a lot of money out there. And for some guardians, it's easy pickings. Real easy pickings. All you have to do is go in front of a judge and say, hey, judge, this poor old person over here is being abused, neglected, and exploited. I think they're trying to kill her. And before you know it, that person who has done absolutely nothing wrong except age in America is under the control of a total stranger. Now you might say, well, why doesn't the family get these guardianships? Why doesn't someone in the family step up and say, I want to take care of this? No, let's not give a professional guardian. I think everybody on this side of the audience knows the answer, and that is that family discord, which is usually the genesis of all of this stuff, allows the judge to say, you know what, I don't believe you, and I don't believe you, and I'm going to give this to my friend whom I know takes care of these cases for me, and I've never had to discipline them, and I just sign their orders, and sometimes I don't even look because I trust them. That's why family members with parents or loved ones who have assets rarely, if ever, are appointed guardians for their loved ones, because there's just too much money at stake, and the judge doesn't have the time. Now let's talk about judges. You know, I'm glad I remembered that. Do you know what the probate judges around the state say? Not just around the state, Texas in particularly. The hotspots for all of this are Texas, New Mexico, Florida, New York, California, Nevada, Colorado, where we have affiliates in all of those places. All of them. If you take a look at our website, you'll see a map filled with affiliates all over the country, because this is not just a Florida problem. It is a national and even worldwide problem. Other countries deal with this very effectively. We don't. The judges will say, Dr. Sugar, we do our best, but we're overworked. We're underpaid. We're understaffed. We don't have the time to investigate these cases. We need to have more money from the legislature so that we can actually look at these cases. What I'm describing is a cold judge. A cold judge is somebody who walks into the courtroom with a stack of papers like this that he's never even looked at, and depends on his clerk to have read. The clerks will tell you there are so many damn guardianships that they don't have the time to read anything. So the narrative that the judge is given for the first time is what determines ultimately his disposition and judgment. Does that make sense? They go back to the legislature, and the legislature tell them, We just have this much amount of money. Why don't you just stop making so many wards? Because you know how many new wards happen in Florida every month? Shall I tell you? Between 700 and 800 new wards every month in the state of Florida. Think about that. Some of them are public, some of them are private, sure. Some of them are family. They are. But if the judges are really serious about being so overworked, they should really think about not being so quick to push the button for guardianship. So the judges have a problem. The families have a bigger problem. The families are completely unprepared for what guardianship throws at them. It is impossible for any normal human being, no matter how educated they are, because, Mr. Gutierrez, you have the advantage of knowing the system. You work in it every day. You have the advantage of having been in front of those, whether they like you or not. And I agree with you. You know, there's a lot of what you say that makes a great deal of sense, and I'm really happy to hear it. But for a family member, like I was and my wife was, you don't understand what the hell is going on in this. There's no way you can be prepared for the assault on your integrity, the assault on your money, the assault on your loved one. And there's no way you can be prepared to see your loved one poisoned on a regular basis with huge lethal doses of antipsychotic, atypical antipsychotic medications, which turns your loved one into a zombie and then activates the next industry, which is the gastrointestinal specialties. My brothers in medicine, about whom I'm extremely embarrassed, who make a huge amount of money by sticking feeding tubes through the abdomens of these poor zombies until they die. There's a lot to be said about transparency. There's a lot to be said about guardianship. There's a lot to be said about abuse. And we have just skimmed the surface today, literally. It's taken me 5 years of my life from my retirement to begin to understand the predatory nature of this abysmal business. Because my mother-in-law and my mother, they're not a business to me. They're my blood. And no guardian can have that relationship. No guardian can ever be sensitive enough to them, and no guardian will ever be able to make the perfect decision for them. In fact, most of the decisions that guardians make have nothing to do with the wishes of the ward. Nothing. And here's why. Advance directives. Everybody know what an advance directive is? It's part of your estate plan. It's where you say what you want to happen in the event that you become non-compos mentis, incapacitated, which, by the way, is a ridiculous term. There is no definition for it. I have 3 books in my library at home for judges, for social workers, and for psychologists from the American Bar Association trying to figure out what incapacitated means. They can't figure it out either. It's a made-up word. It replaced the word incompetent. Incompetent is easy to prove. Incapacitated can mean anything you want. You could be incapacitated if you break your hip. You could be incapacitated if you had a heart attack. You could be incapacitated if you're in a coma. You could be incapacitated if you're recovering from surgery. So incapacitated, it's not a real good term. The decisions that are made by professional for-profit guardians in our experience, and I grant you, our experience is not 100%. It doesn't cover every case. But in the hundreds of cases that we do have, there is a uniformity to the reports. It starts with family dysfunction. It ends with exploitation, neglect, abuse, death, destruction, and it's just not acceptable. Our organization has worked very hard with Representative Kathleen Pasadoma last year, and this year we have pending legislation which will do more to reform guardianship. Our legislation last year, which was Senate Bill 5, passed the legislature 142-0. The legislature has spoken. They get it. Every one of them, because I think I spoke to every one of them. They know there's a huge problem here in Florida. Now, Anthony Palmieri, who's sitting in the back of the room, is part of the solution. At least we hope so. Because if his program does what it's supposed to do, it investigates any guardianship that's suspect, whether it's family guardians, public or private guardians. And I pray, Anthony, that your program be incredibly successful, that you have to hire a dozen assistants to do it. Because I know you've already found some professional guardians who are doing some terrible things, and you found a lot of family guardians who didn't understand what they were getting into and maybe didn't send the report in right, or maybe took money when they shouldn't have. Our focus is on professional for-profit guardianships. I don't have a big bone to pick with others. You know, Mr. Gutierrez does public guardianship as well. They're under a terrible situation. The state pays next to nothing. What is it, $26.50 a year for a public guardian? What can you do with that money? Our concern is with the entire process. It is invalid, it is immoral, and although it is legal in a court of equity that doesn't have any juries, we feel very strongly that we need to work to make the system much better. Maybe tear it down and start all over again. Maybe that's what's necessary. But the system as it works today doesn't work, and it empowers a lot of abuse, neglect, exploitation, pain, torture. It's not what it's supposed to be, and it's not doing what it was designed to do, and it must be changed.
Thank you, Dr. Sugar. Mr. Gutierrez, you have 15 minutes for your closing argument.
I'm not going to take the full 15 minutes, but can there be improvements? You betcha. We live in an imperfect world. And until we leave this world, it's still going to be imperfect. It's hard, or it's easy to criticize any individual for what they've done or what they haven't done. But being in the individual's shoes may give you a different perspective. Let me tell you about my stories. Most of my patients do not have any family members. Or those few that do have, they do not want to participate in any manner or form. One patient, approximately female, 62 years of age, was diagnosed with end-stage renal disease. The nephrologist told me, Fernando, you know, she's at that point where let's just do comfort measures only. And I said, hey doctor, I said, she's only 62. I said, can't we give at least dialysis a shot? Oh yeah, you're right. No, let's do it. Now this patient is non-compliant with all her other medications. All she does is go to dialysis 3 times a week. It's in December, it will be 3 years. She's still alive. Her family does not visit her at all. Yet I feel like the Blues Brothers movie, I'm on a mission from God. There's individuals that need an advocate to stand up and defend them. And many times there's physicians and clinicians who want to cut life short. That story is not told on the Guardian side. The stories that you always hear is about the bad ones who've stolen money, who've done things outside of a court order. But I can tell you that many of these individuals in my private practice have never done an advance directive. They are now medically incapacitated. So I cannot ask them, what are your values? What do you want to do on the end of life? So I have to resort to best interest of the patient. And that's difficult, especially when you don't know the individual. But through the grace of God and through the assistance of other clinicians, that's how I help my patients. Again, that story you'll never hear in the paper. But the fact is, guardianship is a very difficult profession. Those who get into this profession, I hope most of them get into it for the right reason, and I believe they do. But we all have our limitations. In order to gather more credibility in guardianship and guardianship law, is that we need guardians to stand up and not be afraid for their patients first, not worry about what the doctor's going to say or what the facility wants or what the legal system suggests, but stand up for that person and do what is right for that person. I always tell everyone that the patients that I follow, I treat like family. And if you do that, if most guardians do that, most likely, more than not, you would do what the right thing is. I don't profess to know everything. I'm not a medically trained clinician. That is why I've taken many courses in bioethics to help understand the decisions that I make. But I could always consult with a registered dietitian or respiratory therapist, even registered nurses, so that the decision I make, I can have some type of moral certitude. Because when you're dealing with life and death, and that's what guardians are really in the business of, there's no mulligans, there's no second chance. The decisions we make are permanent. And we're talking about a living soul, a soul that has no one except the guardian to advocate for. Yes, we can always improve. Yes, we need changes. But to understand truly the day, the activities of what guardians do, most people, number one, would not do it, and they would have more compassion for those of us who have taken on this noble profession. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. And that wraps up this debate. I appreciate everyone coming out today. We learned something, gained some perspective. Let's thank Dr. Sugar, Mr. Gutierrez. Apologize if your question did not get answered. I'm sure these gentlemen will be around for a little bit after if you want to speak with them one-on-one. Thank you, everyone.
Fernando, do you object to taking questions? Good, let's open it up. Yes, sir.
I've been a guardian for about 8 months now. And I had to go through a lot of process. I feel...
Family guardian?
No, I'm a professional guardian type. And I think, Dr. Sugar, that you think the negative too bluntly. In my view, I had to go through a lot of training. Not only the 40 hours of professional training, take 2 tests, and spend a lot of money of my own money to become qualified. Then when I had my first few cases, I had to see a lawyer. I had to get a lawyer to work on a pro bono basis, which is very difficult to find. And to come to court, the ward or the client, they have a lawyer representing them. There are 3 professional doctors that examine that patient to make sure they're incompetent or incapacitated, and to what degree. And then, after all this process is finished, I might get approved to be a guardian for that case. Now I have 4 pro bono cases, and I take care of them diligently, to the best of my ability.
May I correct you on something?
Yes, please.
There is no way that 3 MDs evaluated your ward. No way. If you look at the statute, the examining committees, and that's what you're talking about, can be composed of a minimum of 1 physician, and the other 2 can be social workers, psychologists, and in one case, a very famous case I might add, a state trooper was the person who was recruited to render someone incapacitated. I would say to you, God bless you for the work you're doing, and if the business model isn't working for you, I would change professions.
No, I go into this diligently and willingly. But in my case, there were 3 medical professionals who evaluated this ward before he or she was determined to be incapacitated. Okay? So I enjoy this work. It's a work of charity. And I resent this accusation of being everybody's abusing everybody in the guardianship
Okay,
business.
so let's make this perfectly clear. Are there good guardians? I've already answered that question. Yes.
That's nice of you. Thank you.
Well, what would you expect me
I
to say?
think most of them are good guardians.
How would you know? How would you know most of them?
I go to meetings. I observe.
What meetings do you go to?
Association meetings.
Right, so what do you expect to hear? However, if you go to our meetings, you'll hear a very different story. A very different story. But I want to make this point, and I'm not pointing at you. I should stop that. How would anybody know anything about guardianship? Tell me, how many wards are there in the state of Florida? You don't know. I don't know. Nobody knows.
Are you going to answer for me?
Yes, please
By
answer.
the way, I think you had the wrong information about the number of guardians. There's only 500 professional guardians in all of the state of Florida.
That's right.
Right.
But there are 1,000 guardians.
There are thousands and thousands of wards. How do you expect them to be taken care of? If they are indigent, if they don't have families that take responsibility for them, what is your solution?
It's simple. It's really simple. They are not just wards. They are wards of the state. And if the state is going to create wards, they need to take care of those wards. What does the state do? They punt. Because the judicial system doesn't have the interest, money, time, or availability to go to the drugstore when somebody needs a prescription filled, or to take somebody to the doctor's office. That's where you guys come in.
Right.
And a lot of you, I'm sure, do a good job. What I'm talking about is our experience. And the people on this side of the room would debate you very strongly, but I will tell you again, how many wards are there in the state of Florida?
Thousands, tens of thousands.
Give me a number.
Well, 20% of the state of Florida are
Seniors.
65
Right.
years and older. So we are the state with the
But you're not
largest
answering the question, how
Let me
many?
answer. Let me answer.
Yeah.
65, those who are 65 and older, it's 20% of the state of Florida. We have the oldest population in the country.
Granted.
Okay? So there's tens of thousands of them.
How do you know?
And they are multiplying because they all come in from New York and other states.
But you haven't answered the question, my
What's your
friend.
question?
How many wards are there in the state of Florida?
120,000.
And you the point I'm making is that nobody knows how many wards there are except the Department of Elderly Affairs, which has that information and will not release it, which makes study of guardianship impossible. Fernando, please go ahead.
Anybody have a question? Sure.
You were talking about the scrutiny of the courts and being under the control and the watchful eye of the courts. Well, how is it that an 89-year-old Holocaust survivor is Baker acted, locked down in the basement of a metropolitan hospital for 3 weeks without a court hearing? How does that happen? And it so happened because that was my father. We didn't even know where he was. The guardian had a no contact order put on him, so he didn't even know he had a family out there fighting for him. How does this happen? Court has completely abrogated its duty to my father, and very sadly and tragically, the same magistrate who is working under the auspices of a judge has just now let a predator out, someone who was caught in a sting against a 14-year-old girl, someone he thought was a 14-year-old girl. He gets a pass. He's out on the streets. My father, at 89 years old, couldn't get out of lockdown. So where are the courts protecting our loved ones and scrutinizing a guardian who would actually put someone into lockdown for 3 weeks? And I have all the papers to
Well,
back this.
yeah, I can't comment because I don't know the details, but what generally I can say is that it seems unreasonable that the guardian would have done that. But then again, that's why I strongly urge that these guardians consult with a specialist, whoever it may be. Maybe it was another psychologist to get another evaluation on that individuals. But a guardian has to be proactive. If they're not, you may run into situations like you did have.
The guardian was proactive, and my father was kept against the law without hearings.
That I can't answer to, because that's a legal issue that I can't answer. You want to, Dr.
Oh,
Sugar,
really?
pick the next one?
Yes, my name is Irela Castillo, and I have been in guardianship with my mother for the past 9 years. The story, I don't want to tell you. I just want to ask one question, 2 questions, as a matter of fact. Dr. Sugar, how many guardians are there in the state of Florida?
Overall, about 1,000.
About 1,000. Who
There are
has
560, according to testimony in the legislature last year, that you can look up on the Florida Senate website. There are 560 private for-profit guardians in the state of Florida. The rest in that calculation are public guardians. That's what was said in the legislature.
Okay, we have heard here today, or I have heard at least something very new to me, that there are good guardians. Apparently here in Pinellas, but we don't have them in Dade County. Now, of all the bad guardians that we all have heard, of the 1,000, what? We have only heard about 2 good ones here today. When have you heard in the state of Florida that a guardian has been convicted of stealing from a ward, of stealing from the family? And when have you heard of a judge being convicted of approving such acts? Has anybody heard? Good. Thank you very much.
I would just add to that, when is the last time anyone is aware of a guardian being stripped of a certification? That's a better question, actually. Because guardians don't have licenses. You know, their only qualifications are that they took the course and passed the test, and I think attend some continuing medical. That's all fine. But where is the discipline? Where is the supervision? We've heard all these stories about horror stories. I'm not aware of a case, and perhaps I just need to be made aware of a case. You do? How many guardians do you know that have been decertified?
I know approximately 3 because I've been a successful guardian. The court has called me and asked me to take these cases over.
That's wonderful news. Thank you,
Yes,
and I'm
they
sure you're
go
doing.
Pasco County.
And I'm sure you're doing a great job. Yeah.
My question is, if the guardian has removed personal property from the board's house or wherever they're from, and they don't have a court order, is that theft? Or when they have to return it because they've taken it, because the judge told them to, they didn't have the authority to take it? What happens to them when they do that? Is that they committed a theft, but they're not convicted of the crime?
Oh, yeah, that's a legal issue, but my instructor, who I took the class 8 years ago, she always tells us we should bring somebody in for inventory purposes, but do you want to say something, Irene, to that?
I've been a guardian for 33 years, plus the guardianship 40-hour course for 25 years, and currently have 18 wards. The amount of misinformation and misrepresentation today has been incredible, and I'd like to address several of those things, and one of them is the guardian has the authority to remove items from a house. They do not have the authority to get rid of them. But in order to protect them, they have the authority to do that. Now, some of the other things that were said today about the 5 guardians in whatever year it was, they didn't keep track of guardians. There were always guardians. I started in 1982, and there were hundreds of guardians in our area. They just didn't register. So this huge boom in guardianship is not new.
Well, then the legislature has been deceived by a member of this this
were
fraternity.
registered. They were not.
All I know is what the legislature told me.
Well, I served on a committee that was called the Study Commission for Guardianship Law in 1988. And this committee was chaired by Rosemary Barquette, who later became the Chief Justice for the Supreme Court of Florida. And this committee was comprised of 3 judges, attorneys from the Florida Bar, 2 senators, 2 representatives of clerk of the court, and a public guardian, and myself as the only professional guardian. We had public hearings for 1 year, and we came up with many, many changes, including the term incapacitated, which was to allow for a limited guardianship. When you were incompetent, you were all or nothing. You were either incompetent or you were competent, which was not the case. So we came up with the term incapacitated to allow for a limited guardianship. Now, many of the things that you are hearing today are a result of not having sufficient follow-up on guardians. It is not always the guardians who are performing these duties properly, but it is a lack of censure. I agree with you completely. The judge is the bottom line. So you're blaming guardians for many things that are not their issues.
May I reply, Ms. Rausch?
Certainly.
The reason I know Ms. Rausch is because I know you by your reputation. You've been around for a very long time.
33.
That's right, and you are a senior member of the Guardianship Association. Is the Pinellas County Guardianship Association part of the Florida State Guardianships?
No, they are not.
Is there a reason for that?
Well, they were established in 1977 and they chose to be independent.
Okay, but I'll get to you, just a second. I have always believed in the common good. I believe that the greatest person is the person who gives of himself for the betterment of others. And if that is indeed what guardians do, I'll support them till the day I die. And that's the way it's supposed to work. We all agree. It should be a noble profession. No one would argue with it, least of all me. Unfortunately, in the case of many for-profit guardians, that noble aspiration has been replaced by greed, avarice, and frankly, I'll speak for myself, sadism. Sadism, you may disagree, because it's all in the eyes of the beholder. But what we have all experienced, what we have all seen, not just here in Pinellas County, but all over Florida, and if you look at our film, Broken, we changed the name, by the way. The film is now called Broken, and it's on our website. It's Broken, the Fallout of Abusive Guardianship. You'll see a bunch of stories. Ellen, please.
I'm sorry, we're going to have to go.